The process that you're seeing today have literally been around for hundreds, some of them maybe thousands of years, even Egyptian times or before, yeah.
In the EU, it's illegal to make anything less than 3 years and call it whiskey, but in the United States, we have a carve-out for corn whiskey, which is just a nod to the tradition of moonshine making.
1908, we had the introduction of the striding man. It's always amazing that you just have to have that picture and people know what you're talking about.
Welcome to Kings County Distillery. I'm Colin Spoolman. I'm the co-founder and distiller. We've been in the Brooklyn Navy Yard for about 15 years, started in 2010, and we make American whiskey, bourbon, rye, single malt, entirely grain to glass right here in the historical Brooklyn waterfront. And we are the first craft distillery to open up in New York City since Prohibition.
We're in front of the main visitor centre at Glenkinchie Distillery. The striding man at the door representing the Johnnie Walker brand. Glenkinchie is one of the 4 corner distilleries representing each corner of Scotland. Glenkinchie was chosen to represent the lowlands, which is really good for us, and it's really helped to raise our profile being associated with the brand. Everybody knows the striding man. It's one of the best recognised advertising features, I guess, worldwide. And now you'll see there's a dog beside the striding man. So one of our pictures in the distillery dates from 1923, and in that picture there was a dog called Bruce. So the dog beside the striding man is local to the distillery, representing the figure of Bruce, which is now over 100 years ago, yeah.
And that's Harold. Harold is a distillery cat. Most distilleries have cats because you store a lot of grain, and grain attracts mice. It's not the most cinematic part of the process, but this is our corn silos. So once a month, we'll use this yellow tube, which is a transport auger, and we'll have a tractor trailer come and essentially dump 40,000 pounds of corn up the tube into one of our 2 grain silos. All of our grain is grown in upstate New York at Lakeview Organic Grain. And then we also use a lot of barley, and the barley that we use is imported from the United Kingdom.
Glenkinchie was originally started by 2 farmers, 2 brothers, but in 1837 they relocated to this place because of the Kinchy Burn, the stream, and that was their traditional water source. So the buildings behind me, the ones on the left, date from the 1830s from the original distillery buildings. The ones on the right, the Victorian brickwork style, dates from the 1880s. That's when Glenkinchie became a proper industrial distillery, moving into much larger production during the Industrial Revolution. And this is my bike. This is how I come to my work. Okay.
We have 4 ingredients to make whiskey at Kings County. We have corn, we have barley, we have yeast, and then we have barrels. And those are the only ingredients that we use. And water, New York City tap water. So all of those things come together to make whiskey. This malted barley is called Golden Promise. It's an ingredient that was originally developed by the Scotch whiskey industry. What malt is seeds that have been allowed to germinate. And before they actually sprout, they're dried in a kiln, and they have a different enzyme profile than a dormant grain. So as the grain is awakening, there are enzymes that convert all the starch in the grain into energy for the plant to grow. We can use the same enzymes to convert starch to sugar, and we can use that sugar then to make alcohol.
The raw materials that you use, first of all, start with the water, barley. The barley that we use, we call it spring barley. And do you know this? When the barley grows, it makes energy, sugar. And the sugar is neatly stored in the grain in the form of starch. Now we need to get access to the starch to turn it back into sugar, because we need sugar to make alcohol. And we do that, we take control of one of nature's processes, the process of germination, and we call that process malting.
This is our grain mill. So Corn falls in the top, and then it augers into the building where it will go into our mash cooker.
This is the actual mill. The mill is made by a company called Porteous, based in the north of England. Now the story goes, the legend goes, that the Porteous mills did not fail. So Porteous went bust round about 1970s. You'll still see lots of Porteous mills in distilleries, but Porteous no longer exists as a company, a victim of their own success. And here's a small version of the mill. From the mill, we get this, we call it grist. And people compare, next part of the process, the coffee making process. Do you know you get coffee beans, put them through a grinder, break up the beans, and then pass hot water through to pick up the flavours? We're going to do something very similar. This is the mash tun. It's empty just now, it's still hot, been emptied fairly recently. We put 10 tons of barley through the mill into the mash tun.
This tank is our mash cooker. In Scotland, there's a slightly different process for mashing, which is kind of steeping the grains and making more of a tea from the grains. Corn is a very gelatinous grain, and so we put the corn directly into the mash cooker, get it very nice and gelatinous, and basically heat the water to a boil, and then we'll cool the cooker down to 160 degrees. That's when we'll pitch the malted barley, and the enzymes in the barley will begin to convert the starch to sugar.
The sugar is neatly stored in the grain in the form of a starch. Imagine a starch is a bit like the chain on my bicycle. Each link in that chain will be a simple sugar like glucose, a double link will be maltose. Now, we are fortunate that the barley has natural tools inside it to break up the starches back into sugars. We call them enzymes, but the enzymes operate at different temperature. So the temperature of the water that we're going to add is really important. The first water that we're going to add is 64 degrees Celsius, okay? Second water, 77 degrees Celsius, and the third water is going to be 84, hotter again. Now what's left in the mash tun at the end of the process? 10 tons of spent barley. We call it draff, and we basically use it as cattle feed. The next stage in the process is fermentation. Fermentation, we're going to add yeast, a living fungus. So this room is where we carry out fermentation. We've got 6 wooden wash packs. We fill 13 of these in a week. Now I'll just briefly take you through the different stages. We're too early at this point to be making alcohol, so the yeast is in there already. Now you'll see bubbles starting to form. Now we're starting to make alcohol. This will be maybe 8 hours, 7 or 8 hours on from the last one. So we're now making CO2, we're now making alcohol, and we're also making heat.
So these 5 steel tanks are 4,000 gallon tanks. They hold up to 3 days worth of fermentation in each tank. During fermentation, we'll add yeast, and the yeast will consume sugar and oxygen, and they'll produce carbon dioxide and alcohol. By the time you're done fermenting, you'll have no residual sugars left, and you'll have about 8% alcohol, what we call Distillers beer. In Scotland, they would call it wort, but it's all the same. It's just a fermented 8% alcohol, sort of undrinkable beer that will then get distilled into whiskey.
So when the temperature in the wash bag reaches roughly 35 degrees Celsius, the yeast starts to die, the bubbles fall, and after maybe 50 hours or more, we get this rough beer we call wash. So the wash will be somewhere between 8 and 10% alcohol. It's really basically a rough beer. Now after 50 hours, we would consider the character to be cereal or nutty. We've now stopped making alcohol, now we try to develop character. After 65 hours, starts to get grassy. 80 hours starts to get fresh floral. Once you get to 100 hours, a really strong smelly tropical fruit like banana. So another decision-making point in making whiskey is the length of time for fermentation. Glenkinchie will sit about there for fermentation. So although it's drinkable, arguably, you know, it wouldn't be a nice drink.
After fermentation, we'll pump in that 8% Distillers beer into this still, which we call the stripping still. It does the first distillation, first pass. And the way a still works is there's a heating element, which in our case is just a steam coil of compressed steam. That heats the water and alcohol to 173 degrees, which is the boiling point of alcohol. And so the alcohol vapor will start evaporating off. It'll go up into the neck of the still, over this pipe here, which is called the lin arm, into this side of the still, which is a condenser. And the condenser has cold water running through a bundle of vertical pipes, and that creates a lot of cold surface area for the alcohol vapor to bead on the inside of the condenser, and then it'll run into this tank for collection. So all you're doing when you're distilling is you're turning something to vapor, and then you're condensing it right back down to liquid. And in so doing, because alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water, you can concentrate the alcohol in a very crude way. And this type of still, called a pot still, is sequential and batch. It's a batch process. In the 1800s, they invented a continuous still, and most American whiskey is now made on continuous stills, which does this same work but much more efficiently. But many purists, myself included, would argue that a pot still gives you both a richer texture of the whiskey, a little bit of a better flavor, but most importantly, it gives the distiller more control over the flavor of the whiskey, batch to batch, day to day. And this distillate we call the low wines. It's a sort of oily, not super desirable in terms of flavor. The last step of the process before maturation is the second distillation, the spirit run.
So this is a still house. We've only got 2 stills here at Glenkinchie, but the wash still you see in front of you is the largest copper still on the mainland of Scotland. So when we empty the wash back, we put half of the contents into the wash still. A still is basically a big copper kettle. We heat up the inside. Alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water, so when we heat up the still, the alcohol vaporizes. The light vapors rise up the still, cross the neck and down the pipe. On the outside wall, we've got a condenser which turns the vapor back to liquid. It's a 30-metre copper coil in a cold water bath, the cold water coming from the Kinchie burn. So when the hot vapor hits the cold copper, it turns back to liquid, and after our first distillation, we've got an alcohol we call low wines, roughly maybe 22 to 24% alcohol. Not strong enough, so we distill again. This time when the vapor turns to liquid, among other things, we have the collectible alcohols. But what we end up with is basically this new make spirit. This is maybe 70 to 71% alcohol. This one was taken at 71.2% alcohol. So this is a strong alcohol, and this is what we turn into whiskey.
All distilled spirits are clear in the beginning, and then they become yellow through aging. Unless you're Cuervo Gold, and then they just add caramel coloring to tequila because Americans thought that tequila tasted like moonshine because it was clear, and moonshine was frowned on in the Prohibition era. So making a gold tequila made it sort of like whiskey, which people understood, and people drank it. And tequila became the second most popular spirit in the United States after vodka, and I think right now still above whiskey. The last thing that I'll just point out down here are these hydrometers. This is how we measure the alcohol content, so each of these is calibrated to work within a specific proof range and will tell you the alcohol content of the whiskey. It's just measuring the density, so it'll float lower in a thinner liquid, you have more alcohol. It'll float higher in a denser liquid, you have more water. And in Scotland, this would all happen in a locked box that only the tax collector has a key to. We didn't get the locked box because it's not part of our law, but that spirit safe is a big component of a Scotch distillery. We don't have one because it's not part of our laws. And they cost money.
So this is the spirit safe. The spirit safe's a control point for the still house. Every drop of alcohol from the stills and condensers would come through here. So in the first window, we see what's coming through the first still and the first condenser, the low wines. In the second window, we see what's coming through the second still and the second condenser. Now when the alcohol goes through the second condenser, changes back to liquid, we call it in 3 parts. The head, the heart, or the tail, or faints as we sometimes call it.
And the heads are, again, sort of solventy, undesirable for sort of being sharp flavors. And then the tails are sort of a skunky, funky beer, almost soapy flavor that's also undesirable. So through this sort of heart's cut, we're separating out the best flavor of the whiskey.
Now we collect the heart. This is what we turn into whiskey. As you saw, it's clear like water, on average 70-71% alcohol.
And that's what we'll then go get put into charred oak barrels for maturation. From here, we go into this big tank over here. And so the last stage will be filling barrels from the distillate that's in that tank. Barreling is pretty labor intensive because each of those barrels weighs 500 pounds. American whiskey requires charred new American oak barrels. And these are brand new barrels straight from the cooperage. We fill about 3 to 4 barrels a day, depending on what recipe we're doing. And we can only use the barrels once to be called American whiskey. So most barrels end up becoming Scotch whiskey barrels for their second life.
So people ask, why do we mature whiskey in oak barrels? You know, the spirit we produce, it's got some rough edges, it's got off notes, so we hope that maturation in oak will take away these rough edges, deliver new flavours, depending on the type of oak that we use. The barrels in the double row there, they are all ex-American bourbon casks. You'll find that more than 90% of Scotch whisky will mature in bourbon casks. The law in the United States only allows their industry to use the barrel once, then they have to get rid of it. Us being Scottish, kind of careful, we could be using that barrel for another 100 years.
The minimum time is 3 years that's when we start to taste the whiskeys. You can see this is the stave of the barrel. So it's got this charcoal layer, and what that's doing is it's sort of polishing the whiskey. It's absorbing some of the high boiling point chemicals, the really large molecules. And then also, because the barrels are watertight but not airtight, it will also evaporate out some of the lowest boiling point chemicals. So on a hot day, these barrels will all be very highly pressurized, and then on a cool day like today, the whiskey will shrink and it'll actually create a vacuum, and it's pulling whiskey back out of this porous charcoal. So in the same way that a tea bag and a small cup will infuse faster, the small barrels give you flavor faster. And by the same token, the second time you use the barrel, you get a lot less flavor from it, which is the main differentiator between American whiskey and Scotch or Irish whiskey or Japanese whiskey for that matter.
Every barrel gives a slightly different colour, a different character, a different note. So what I'm saying, each barrel is unique. It's the talent of the blender, people like Dr. Emma Walker. It's her task to replicate what she did last year when she's trying to make a single malt.
I'm Dr. Emma Walker. I'm the Johnnie Walker Master Blender, and you're here today in Johnnie Walker Princess Street in Edinburgh, and we are sat in the beautiful Bothy Bar. We get asked, why would you blend good single malt whiskies? And I would say all of the whiskies we make are good. They are all amazing. A whiskey from a single distillery is great and it really has its place, but we love to be able to see what do you do when you bring individual characters together.
All the whiskeys that we make are here for sale on the shelf in our tasting room. We do some unaged whiskeys. These are moonshines, sort of colloquially. In the EU, it's illegal to make anything less than 3 years and call it whiskey, but in the United States, we have a carve out for corn whiskey, which is just a nod to the tradition of moonshine making in the United States. And my background is that I grew up in Kentucky and very much around moonshine. So it was important to me when we started as a whiskey distillery to start with moonshines, and that's really how the brand got started. So on this side, we have all of our more mature aged whiskeys. This is the straight bourbon that has more of that kind of Christmas, baking spice, cinnamon, clove notes to it. We have our peated bourbon, which adds a degree of sort of smoke and peat. The art of blending, I liken the process to a piano because you have all of these different glasses lined up from single barrels, and then you can sort of rearrange them.
So in the same way, if you think about building a piece of music, you've got individual instruments and musicians, but when you bring them together, you create something greater than some of the individual parts.
You're looking for some lower notes, some middle notes, some top notes, and those will come from different kinds of barrels.
And that's what we're looking to do when we are blending a Scotch whisky.
Great. I have not been to this distillery. I don't know the distillery very much, so it's my first time trying it. I can't wait. I'm excited about this.
So we've got the Kings County Distillery straight bourbon. I'm really excited to try this.
Can I just say what a privilege and a pleasure it is for me to be trying a whisky that's been made some 3,000 miles away. A product of the old world like myself, trying something that's been taken across to the new world. Absolutely wonderful.
Classic Scotch, a little like creamier and vanilla than I guess maybe I'm expecting from a single malt generally. It's not super overbearing and not super singular. The nice thing about it is that depth of flavor I recognize a little bit from our own whiskeys. So for that, I like it.
It's lovely. It's just that sort of mouth coating, almost like unctuous, a bit of oiliness, but like you said, that lovely spicy oily note comes through, softness, that sweetness, that vanilla that comes through, that just gives it a beautiful long finish.
It's got a spice, peppery finish in it, but it's got a kind of berry note to it as well. Really, really lovely.
I have not had Johnnie Walker Black Label in at least 10 years. A blended whiskey that is internationally ubiquitous.
I'm really excited to try the peated bourbon that's been created by Kings County Distillery.
For people who don't know what peated means, it's smoke. Really interested to try this.
So, interestingly, more toffee. The caramel and the vanilla are still there, but it's being balanced with some sort of more toffee and woody notes.
Oh, the smoke really comes through on the finish, so you get that sort of mouthfeel, that texture.
For people who are into smoky whiskies, absolutely love it.
I will just say to my friends in Scotland, thank you for the opportunity to share the Kings County whiskey with you. Thank you for sharing the Johnnie Walker. Cheers to you. I hope you like our whiskey and I like yours.
I'm not a big bourbon drinker, but I could quite happily start drinking something like this. This is really, really nice. Love it.
It's been amazing to try these. I'm looking forward to hopefully in the near future being able to come to New York, to Brooklyn, and to be able to try the whiskies with you in person. Slán siva, or cheers from Scotland.